Hashtag thrown out with nothing, she found this secret bunker, and everything changed. Before we begin this incredible journey together, I want to ask you something from my heart. If this story moves you, if it makes you feel something deep inside, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Every like, every subscription tells me that these stories matter to you, and it gives me the energy to keep bringing you more. Now settle in, because this story is going to stay with you for a very long time. Maya Cordova was 26 years old when she learned that the people you love the most can become the people who hurt you the worst. It was a Thursday evening in late November, the kind of evening where the sky turns a bruised purple and the wind carries the first real bite of winter. She had been sitting at the kitchen table of the house she had grown up in, the house on Larkspur Lane with the cracked front porch and the mailbox that leaned slightly to the left, and she had been filling out a job application on her laptop when her stepfather, Gerald, walked through the front door with a look on his face that she had learned to fear over the years. It was not anger exactly. It was something colder. It was the look of a man who had already made a decision and was simply waiting for the right moment to deliver it. Her mother, Diane, was standing behind him, and Maya noticed immediately that her mother would not meet her eyes. Diane was holding her own elbows, a nervous habit she had developed sometime in the last decade, and she was staring at a spot on the floor as if the linoleum tiles held some kind of answer that she desperately needed. Maya closed her laptop slowly. She could feel it coming. She had felt it coming for weeks, maybe months, the way you can feel a storm approaching long before the first drop of rain falls. There had been arguments. There had been whispered conversations that stopped the moment she entered a room. There had been Gerald's increasingly pointed comments about how she needed to find her own place, how she was a grown woman now and grown women did not live with their parents, how he and Diane needed their space. Gerald set a cardboard box on the kitchen counter. Maya recognized it. It was the box that had once held a case of canned soup from the wholesale store. Now it was filled with her things. She could see the corner of a photo frame sticking out, the edge of her favorite blue sweater, a few paperback books that she kept on her nightstand. She looked at the box. She looked at Gerald. She looked at her mother. "What is this?" Maya asked, even though she already knew. Gerald crossed his arms over his chest. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with a thick neck and hands that looked like they had been designed for breaking things rather than building them. He had married Diane when Maya was 14, and for the first year or so, he had been charming enough. He brought flowers. He took them out to dinner. He laughed at Maya's jokes and told her she was smart. But charm, Maya had learned, was sometimes nothing more than a mask that certain people wore until they no longer needed it. Once Gerald had settled into the house, once his name was on the lease and his boots were by the front door and his presence had become a permanent fixture, the mask had come off one piece at a time. "You need to go," Gerald said. His voice was flat. There was no cruelty in his tone, but there was no compassion either. It was the voice of a man canceling a subscription, ending a transaction, closing a file. Maya felt her throat tighten. She looked at her mother again. "Mom?" Diane's lips pressed together. Her eyes were red, but no tears fell. Maya would remember that detail later, during the long nights that followed. Her mother's eyes had been red, which meant she had been crying before Maya saw her, which meant she had known this was coming, which meant she had agreed to it or at least had not fought hard enough against it. "It's for the best, sweetheart," Diane said quietly. "For the best?" Maya repeated. "Mom, it's almost December. It's freezing outside. Where am I supposed to go?" "You have friends," Gerald said. "You're a smart girl. You'll figure it out." Maya wanted to scream. She wanted to grab that cardboard box and throw it across the room. She wanted to shake her mother by the shoulders and demand to know when she had become so small, so silent, so willing to let this man make every decision that mattered. But Maya did none of those things. She had learned a long time ago that screaming and throwing things only made Gerald louder and more immovable, and she had learned even longer ago that her mother had made her choice, and that choice was Gerald. It had always been Gerald. In every argument, in every disagreement, in every moment where Maya needed her mother to stand up and say enough, Diane had chosen the path of least resistance, and the path of least resistance always led away from Maya. "Can I at least have until the weekend?" Maya asked. She hated the way her voice sounded. Small. Pleading. Like a child asking for 5 more minutes before bedtime. "Tonight," Gerald said. "I want you out tonight." Maya looked at her mother one last time. Diane turned away and walked down the hallway toward the bedroom. The sound of the door closing was soft, almost gentle, and somehow that made it worse. A slam would have been an acknowledgement. A slam would have meant that Diane felt something. The quiet click of the latch was indifference dressed up as politeness. Maya stood up. She picked up the cardboard box. She noticed that whoever had packed it, probably Gerald, had not included everything. Her winter coat was missing. Her phone charger was missing. The small jewelry box that had belonged to her grandmother, the one with the tiny ballerina that spun when you opened the lid, was missing. She thought about asking for those things, but the look on Gerald's face told her that this was not a negotiation. This was an eviction. She walked to the front door. She paused with her hand on the knob. "Tell Mom I love her," she said, without turning around. Gerald did not respond. Maya stepped out into the November evening, and the cold hit her like a wall. She was wearing jeans, a thin long-sleeved shirt, and sneakers that had a hole near the left toe where the rubber had separated from the canvas. The cardboard box was awkward in her arms, and she shifted it to her hip as she walked down the porch steps. She made it to the sidewalk before the tears came, and once they started, she could not stop them. She stood under the streetlight on Larkspur Lane and cried so hard that her ribs ached, and not a single curtain in any of the neighboring houses moved, and not a single door opened, and not a single voice called out to ask if she was okay. That was the first lesson of being alone, and it was the cruelest one. The world does not stop for your pain. The streetlights keep burning. The cars keep passing. The wind keeps blowing. And you keep standing there, holding a cardboard box full of someone else's idea of what you need, and you realize that you have to decide what comes next because nobody is going to decide it for you. Maya started walking. She did not know where she was going. She knew only that she could not stand still because standing still felt too much like giving up, and giving up felt too much like proving Gerald right. He had always said she would amount to nothing. He had said it in small ways, in looks and sighs and shakes of his head, and he had said it in big ways during the arguments that rattled the windows and made the dog hide under the bed. He had said it so many times and in so many ways that Maya had started to wonder if he was right, and she hated herself for wondering, and she hated him for planting the seed of that wondering. She walked for an hour. The box grew heavier with every block. Her fingers went numb. Her nose ran. She passed through neighborhoods she recognized and neighborhoods she didn't, past fast food restaurants with their bright, beckoning lights, past a church with a nativity scene already set up on the lawn, past a bus stop where an old man in a wool coat sat perfectly still, as if he had been waiting for something for a very long time and had made peace with the possibility that it might never come. Maya had friends, but the kind of friends she had were the kind you went to lunch with, the kind you texted funny memes to, the kind you said, "We should hang out more," to without ever actually making plans. They were not the kind of friends you called at 9 o'clock on a Thursday night to say, "I have nowhere to go. Can I sleep on your floor?" She had tried that kind of honesty once before, 2 years ago, when Gerald had kicked her out for the first time. She had called her friend Lisa, and Lisa had said all the right things, "Oh my God, that's terrible, I'm so sorry," but then Lisa's voice had gotten tight and she had said, "I would totally let you stay here, but my roommate, you know how she is," and Maya had said, "Of course, I understand, don't worry about it," and they had both pretended that the conversation had not fundamentally changed the nature of their friendship. She did not call Lisa this time. She did not call anyone. By 10 o'clock, Maya had wandered to the outskirts of town, to the area where the residential streets gave way to county roads and overgrown lots. There was an old industrial park out here, a cluster of warehouses and storage facilities that had been built in the 1970s during some economic boom that had long since gone bust. Most of the buildings were abandoned now. Their windows were dark, their parking lots cracked and sprouting weeds, their signs faded to illegibility. Maya found a loading dock behind one of the warehouses where the overhang provided some shelter from the wind. She set the cardboard box down and sat on the concrete. The ground was cold, impossibly cold, and she could feel it seeping through her jeans and into her bones. She pulled her knees up to her chest and wrapped her arms around them and tried to make herself as small as possible. She stayed like that for a long time. The stars came out. The moon was a thin crescent, barely a sliver, as if the sky itself could not be bothered to provide more than the minimum amount of light. Maya thought about all the decisions that had led her to this moment, and she tried to identify the one where everything had gone wrong, but the truth was that there was no single decision. There was only a long chain of small surrenders, each one barely noticeable on its own, each one leading inevitably to the next. She thought about her father, her real father, David Cordova, who had died when she was 12. He had been a quiet man, a carpenter who smelled like sawdust and coffee, and he had called her, "my little architect," because she used to build elaborate structures out of blocks and sticks and whatever else she could find. He had died of a heart attack on a Tuesday morning in March, in the middle of sanding a piece of oak for a bookshelf he was building for a client. He was 41 years old. Maya remembered the phone call from the hospital. She remembered her mother collapsing against the kitchen wall and sliding to the floor. She remembered the funeral, the casket, the sound of dirt hitting wood. She remembered thinking that the world had made a terrible mistake and that someone would correct it, that her father would walk through the front door any minute now with sawdust in his hair and say, "What's for dinner, kid?" But the world does not correct its mistakes. The world simply expects you to keep living in the aftermath. After David died, Diane had become a different person. The loss had hollowed her out, and she had tried to fill the hollow with Gerald, who was loud and sure of himself and who made decisions so she didn't have to. Maya understood this, in the abstract, intellectual way that you understand something without forgiving it. She understood that her mother was broken and that Gerald had presented himself as glue. But glue can hold things together in the wrong shape, and that was what Gerald had done. He had held Diane together in a shape that no longer included room for Maya. Somewhere around midnight, Maya fell asleep on the loading dock. It was not a real sleep. It was the shallow, shivering kind of unconsciousness that the body falls into when it is too exhausted to stay awake but too cold and frightened to truly rest. She dreamed of her father's workshop, of the way the light came through the dusty windows in golden columns, of the way he hummed while he worked, always the same song, an old folk melody that he could never remember the words to. She woke up before dawn. Her body was stiff and aching. Her right hand had been curled around the edge of the cardboard box all night, and her fingers were so cold that it took several minutes of flexing and rubbing before they would move properly. The sky was the color of wet cement. A thin frost had settled over everything, turning the weeds in the parking lot into delicate silver sculptures. Maya stood up. Her legs trembled. She was hungry, the deep, gnawing kind of hungry that lives in your stomach like a fist, and she was thirsty, and she needed to use a bathroom, and she was so cold that her teeth were chattering in a steady, involuntary rhythm. She picked up the cardboard box and started walking again, not because she had a destination but because walking was warmer than sitting. She followed a gravel road that led away from the industrial park and into a stretch of wooded land that she had never explored before. The trees were mostly bare, their branches reaching up like dark cracks in the pale sky. The gravel gave way to dirt, and the dirt became a path, narrow and winding, the kind of path made by deer or by people who did not want to be followed. Maya walked for 20 minutes before she saw it. At first, she thought it was a storm cellar. There was a concrete structure set into a hillside, partially concealed by overgrown bushes and fallen leaves. It had a heavy metal door, rusted at the edges but still solid, with a handle that was shaped like a wheel, the kind you might see on a submarine or a vault. The door was set at an angle, facing away from the path, and if Maya had been walking any faster or looking in any other direction, she would have missed it entirely. She stopped. She stared at the door. Something about it felt wrong, or maybe not wrong exactly, but unusual. Storm cellars in this part of the country were usually simple wooden doors set into the ground. This was different. This was engineered. This was built by someone who knew what they were doing and who had a specific purpose in mind. Maya set the cardboard box down. She approached the door cautiously, the way you approach a sleeping animal, unsure of whether it is tame or wild. She reached out and touched the wheel handle. The metal was ice-cold under her fingers. She tried to turn it. It resisted for a moment, and she thought it was locked, but then something shifted inside the mechanism, a deep, grinding click, and the wheel turned a quarter rotation to the left. She pulled on the handle, and the door swung open with a groan that echoed into the darkness below. A set of concrete stairs descended into the earth. The stairs were steep and narrow, and they disappeared into a blackness so complete that it seemed almost solid, as if the darkness itself had weight and texture. A current of air drifted up from below, and it was warmer than the air outside, which struck Maya as remarkable. There was a smell, too, not unpleasant, something like old paper and machine oil and the faintest trace of something floral, like dried lavender. Maya stood at the top of the stairs and had a conversation with herself that she would later describe as the most important conversation of her life. One part of her, the sensible part, the part that had watched enough horror movies to know that descending into mysterious underground bunkers was generally not advisable, said, "Walk away. Find a gas station. Call someone. Do not go down those stairs." Another part of her, the part that was freezing and hungry and exhausted and had nowhere else to go, said, "What is the worst that could happen? You are already at the bottom. You are already at the worst. You might as well see what is down there." She went down the stairs. She counted the steps as she descended. There were 22. At the bottom, she found herself in a small antechamber with concrete walls and a low ceiling. There was another door here, this one lighter, made of painted steel, and it was already ajar. She pushed it open and stepped through, and what she found on the other side made her stop breathing for a full 3 seconds. It was a bunker. A real, honest-to-God, Cold War-era survival bunker. And it was not a small, cramped hole in the ground. It was sprawling. The main room was at least 30 feet long and 20 feet wide, with a ceiling high enough that Maya could stand comfortably without ducking. The walls were reinforced concrete, painted a pale, institutional green that had faded over the decades to a color that reminded Maya of sage. The floor was poured concrete, covered in places with rubber mats that had been laid down to provide insulation. There were lights. That was the first thing that truly amazed her. There were lights, and they worked. Not all of them, perhaps half, but when Maya found the panel of switches near the door and began flipping them one by one, fluorescent tubes flickered to life across the ceiling, filling the space with a humming, bluish-white glow. The electricity had to be coming from somewhere, and Maya would later discover that the bunker had its own generator, a diesel unit housed in a separate room, connected to a fuel tank that still held several hundred gallons of diesel. Someone, at some point, had kept this place maintained. Someone had cared about it. Someone had intended for it to be usable. The main room was furnished. There were metal bunk beds along one wall, 4 of them, stacked too high, with thin mattresses that were old but clean, covered in plastic sheeting that had kept the dust and moisture out. There were folding tables and chairs, a set of metal shelving units that held canned goods, boxes of dried food, bottles of water, and an assortment of supplies that made Maya's eyes go wide. There were blankets, wool and cotton, folded neatly in plastic bins. There were first aid kits. There were flashlights and batteries. There were books, dozens of them, arranged on a makeshift bookshelf made from planks and cinder blocks. There were tools, hand tools mostly, wrenches and screwdrivers and hammers, but also a small toolkit that included a multimeter and wire strippers and soldering equipment. Maya moved through the bunker in a state of stunned disbelief. Beyond the main room, she found a narrow hallway that led to additional spaces. There was a small kitchen area with a propane stove, a sink that was connected to a water tank, and a set of cabinets that held pots, pans, utensils, and an impressive collection of spices that had probably been there since the Reagan administration. There was a bathroom with a chemical toilet and a small shower rigged to the water tank. There was a storage room packed floor to ceiling with supplies. And at the very end of the hallway, there was a small room that had clearly been someone's personal space. It had a single bed, a desk, a chair, and a bookshelf filled with notebooks. Maya sat down on the bed in this small room. She sat down, and she put her hands over her face, and she cried. But these were not the same tears she had cried on Larkspur Lane. Those